Okay, so thank you very much to everyone for joining us. Welcome, and very happy to be here with you for this fourth edition of our webinar. Just before we hand over to Philippe and Tom about this path to agility beyond our commitment, what is the role of the mission to go toward agility. Just to say 2 or 3 words about Evolution Agile. Evolution Agile, we are a professional network. We share one observation and one ambition. Our observation is that today, our current way of working, our organization, were designed for mass production. So that to produce more of the same thing. That's not more accurate today. We don't need more of the same thing. And we believe that the organizations that are based on authority, hierarchy, procedures, and control are not able, won't be able to face the current challenges that we are all facing. Almost everything, all aspects in our lives need to change. So our organizations needs to evolve toward agility, since we don't really know what path we need to take and how to go there. So from our side, agility is a capability that requires a holistic and integrated view to be able to sense and to be able to listen to the context and the environment so that we can empower people to act from that level of understanding and from that level of awareness. So in Evolution Agile, our ambition is to nurture and accelerate the evolution of organization with agility and cooperation. We do so by helping companies in their agile transformations, but also we do so through those events where we share knowledge, practices. We do that also on social networks. And this is our fourth edition of Evolution Agile web event. Today we are going to address with Tom and with Philippe, one of the most important aspects of agility for us is the mission. So I hand over to Pierre to explain how we are going to how this webinar is going to be handled and all the logistics aspects. Pierre.
Yeah, welcome all. So we welcome Tom van der Lubbe today. So Philippe Clark is going to interview him during 20 minutes. If you have a question during this interview time, you can write them into the chat and we'll pick them up at the end of the interview. If you want to ask yourself questions after the interview, we invite you to turn on your camera and to raise your hand and ask your questions. And at the end of the webinar, we'll send you also a link for feedback that help us to improve our webinars that we organize once a month with Evolution Agile. So please now turn off all your camera and your microphone, and we're going to start the interview with Philippe and Tom. Thank you.
So, first of all, thank you, Tom, for having accepted to come this morning and to share with us your experience as the co-founder of Visii and the role of purpose in business and business outcomes. I'm especially delighted to have you, as I think, as I admire you for 3 rare combinations, which is basically thoroughness, business acumen, and humanity. So for me, you are a thinker, a doer, and a concerned citizen. So the first question would be a little bit to tell us about yourself, where you grew up, what did you study, how did that affect your views on business and also about Visii, your company?
Okay, I do. Thank you very much, Philip, for inviting me. I do a very short introduction. So my name is Tom. I'm 52 years old, and about my background, I'm Dutch. And because it's about raison d'être and purpose afterwards, I try to tell something about my background. I'm raised from a Catholic family. Went to Jesuit college, and then I studied in Leiden, which is a very old university. I studied humanities, law, political science, and history. I'm a historian. And then afterwards, I thought I wanted to become a diplomat. So I also studied in Paris for a couple of months, Sciences Po. And then I studied just after the wall came down. I studied in Berlin, political science, which is exactly the opposite from what I did in Sciences Po. I also studied Marxism, for instance, just after the wall came down. And the other aspect, which probably is important for talking about purpose, we'll come to that afterwards, is that when I was 20, which is more than 30 years ago, I had cancer, and I had a chance of surviving this illness with 20%. So I'm very lucky I'm still there. And that probably also shaped my way of thinking about society and doing business. So for me, business is not about becoming rich or earning money. Business for me is doing something which is meaningful. So that is a short introduction.
Thank you very much. So, like you said, purpose can take many shapes. You can talk about it in many ways. So the question is, like, what is it for you, Tom, and how would you define it? And what is at stake when we talk about purpose? What are the why is it important? What difference does it make?
Yeah, I think it makes a huge difference. So it's a starting point, and you come back to this again and again. And on the one hand, as personal purpose, and it's much, let's say, from a more philosophical way. It's about the Greek philosophers and what's the way your position, what are your personal values, and if you have a very clear idea of what your personal values are, you also know where your borders and where your, let's say, what your area is and what you accept and what you don't accept. And the clearer your own values are, the easier life is, to my point of view. And that's exactly the same for a company. So I think that purpose creates clarity. And if you have clear values and you have clear thinking, you also in the end have a clear outcome. And if it's not clear and you're not clear about your values or not clear about the values of the company, then it becomes very messy and nobody knows what the direction of the company is.
Okay. And, when you talk about the purpose, most people sort of like would accept it as something valuable, but they also question its capacity to resist market pressures and dire conditions. So so my question is, how did you at Visii react to the COVID virus? How did mission or how did purpose become concrete in face of a situation that put a lot of other companies in trouble?
I think that if you have a clear understanding about your values and also about the hierarchy of your goals, to put it in a more practical way, then it doesn't matter that much what happens around you. So, for instance, our purpose is to change finance or change the financial sector, to make it more, let's say, qualitative, more a relation type of business, more long-term focused, and we see, let's say, the economy in a more, we think it has to change to a more circular way instead of a linear thinking. That's one. And on the other hand, you have the discussion about the hierarchy of your stakeholders. And we always had a clear hierarchy of our stakeholders, which is always has been on our website. And although we are a business to consumer company, and we have just customers who want to finance an apartment or a house, on our website always has been a kind of circle. It's a kind of clock, so to say. It always starts with the purpose, a raison d'être, the first group of stakeholders are our own people. It's people first, client second, shareholder last. And it always has been our hierarchy. And for clients, you would perhaps expect that it's very strange because people are always telling that you have to put clients first. We always think that if we put our own people first and they are happy and they have the freedom to care about their clients, also the clients will be happy, and we have the highest trust index or client satisfaction in the Netherlands. So I think that's fine. But in times of crisis, when you have this clear hierarchy, we didn't have to change our communication. It always has been people first. So we said in the first week when the lockdown was, we are in this together. We're not going to fire anybody. That's the main goal. If we need more money as shareholders, we will put money into the company again. So in times of crisis, the responsibility of the stakeholders is shareholders first. So there's the obligation for shareholders, especially if they also have money outside of the company, to put the money into the company again, to stay loyal to the people who build up the company together, which is, let's say in the French context, it's fraternité, it's a solidarity in your entity. And the funny thing is that from a research point of view, companies who care about their people in times of crisis have in the long term a higher shareholder value. So there isn't even a discussion that you would say, okay, if you fire as fast as possible, and I'm not talking about, let's say, restaurants who are not able to open their restaurant, etc. But from a research point of view, solidarity makes sense if you want to maximize your shareholder value.
So when the crisis started, right, you reaffirmed your purpose, and can you give us some concrete example of how you went about making this happen and explaining and organizing your company, to face the crisis?
Yeah, it's we already had a recession scenario in place. We didn't expect the corona, the COVID crisis, but let's say business is 50% of the time it's about it's easy to sell, and 50% of the time you are in a recession scenario, and these are kind of cycles. So if you manage a company or if you're an entrepreneur, it's very strange that you're only preparing for the good weather. I mean, you should especially be prepared for the bad weather. So there always should be a recession scenario in place. We already had this recession scenario, and we expected a recession which would harm our sector 50%. So when the recession was there or COVID was there, we just took this recession scenario and said, okay, what do we have to do? And then you take the stakeholders, and we said, okay, there's solidarity. We don't fire anybody. How much liquidity do we have? That always have been transparent. So everybody knows in the company how many months we're able to pay the salaries. If that wouldn't be enough, we gave our commitment as shareholders to put more money into the company. So there was this psychological safety that everybody could just continue to work. We are more productive in these times of crisis than we were before, because everybody is so focused and so loyal also to the company and to each other that we're more productive, and the speed of innovation went up because people are in this kind of remote structure. People are more willing to test stuff. They're just faster in making decisions for themselves to speed up innovation, try stuff, etc. So, and that has been, let's say, repeated all the time. So what we did is that we, the rhythm of the meetings, we changed. So we have one town hall every week. Normally we didn't have it that often, and we actively show our liquidity every week, although everybody could also find the liquidity in our managing systems. So it's repeating the same message again and again. So every week we tell we're not fire anybody. Every week we tell we have more liquidity than the last week. And every week we tell what innovation is going on, and everybody sees, oh, we are speeding up, we are becoming faster.
I found out on the web when I was researching this interview, something that I thought was interesting is how did you spread the work in function of what the people own personal situations were. I don't know if you see what I refer to.
You mean that we made this distinction between green, orange, and red in our company? That we said, okay, people who are able to work 100%, they work 100%, and on the other hand, people who have a partner who works in a hospital, they don't have to work at all. Is that the aspect?
Yeah, that's it. I think that was very interesting. It was one of the outcomes of your discussions when you got together and you actually discussed the crisis. You also made a distinction between the personal situations of people and their relations to the amount of work they had to do. And I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah. So the people who are, let's say, single or don't have children or have a partner and they are just able to function normally, they will just took an Excel sheet. So it's not very complicated. We're only 50 people. So you take an Excel sheet and then you say, okay, can you just work 100%? Or do you, for instance, have a partner? And this first part of the lockdown, for instance, I have 2 very small children. My wife works 100%. So we were in the middle category of sharing the time. So we couldn't be in phone calls at the same time, because with 2 little children who are 4 and 5, that doesn't work. They know exactly when their parents are in a call at the same time. It's a real mess. So I was in the 50% category with a partner and 2 kids at home. And then we had partners who have, let's say, husband or wife who work in hospitals, and they also have children. And there we said, you don't have to work. Just see how you can support your colleagues, and that gives a kind of psychological security, because you know that if you don't have to work at all, then there's a kind of moral obligation towards the team that you will sit, let's say, in the evening when your children are asleep, then you will just take your computer and say, okay, what can I do to support my colleagues? In the end, we had a very good productivity, but the thinking is the other way around. So it's always about starting with a kind of base scenario, which only can become better. And it's the same with liquidity or cash flow. We always said, for instance, let's assume we don't have any revenues. How long can we pay the salaries? And then for sure, you will not have 0 revenue. So you have a base scenario which can't be more negative, and then you're building up. And if you start with the most negative scenario, then every new piece of information is a positive one. And it's exactly the opposite which we do in our way of dealing with the crisis on a governmental level. Then every week there was a new piece of information that they said, oh, the numbers are going up. And that's exactly what you don't want. So you want the most negative scenario, and then every week you have doesn't matter what information you have, it's always positive.
Yeah, you mentioned fear, and you mentioned it twice, and I think that this is something very very present in the way you have structured Visii. I mean, people should know that in your company, the idea of getting fear out of the equation goes very far. And since when you hire somebody, you give him a guarantee of salary for a very long time. I think it's 40 years, which
eternity. Yeah.
I think most people would consider completely out of sync with how the world works. So can you expand a little bit on this idea of the relationship between the necessity to get fear out of the way so that something else happens?
Yeah, first I would say that we are in a normal company. and the other ones are not normal. So our whole society, from a historical point of view, but also if you talk about, let's say, families or societies, or that's normal. So we don't do year-end reviews with your partner or with your children, etc. That doesn't happen. So there's always this kind of collective attitude of helping each other, families, friends, etc. And you're not going to send a friend a bill if somebody organized a weekend or something like that. So I think we are the normal and the other ones are not normal, but sometimes you're so focused or locked in your kind of mental box that we don't realize this anymore. What do you do? But also from a scientific point of view, fear ruins your productivity. So if you're in front of the snake, waiting for the snake to bite you, then you lose half of your productivity. So all those people who have to go to work and they don't know if they still have their job next week, they only have, if you're lucky, they have 50% of their productivity left. So that's what you have to take out from a scientific point of view as well. So that's the normal thing. If you talk about psychological safety, between brackets, Amy Edmondson, etc., it's exactly the same. The whole Aristotle project, where Google did analysis on which teams are most productive, is always about psychological safety. It's about if you can share your own vulnerabilities or your own doubts without any consequence, the output of the team is maximized. So from a scientific point of view, the best thing is to take out the fear, to create psychological safety. And if situations become more difficult, or the topics you have to deal with are becoming more important. So if you talk about nuclear plants or hospitals, etc., where there is much more at stake than doing a mortgage, then it's even more important, because if you fear to criticize, for instance, your colleagues, then you have an airplane crash. I mean, this is the research Amy Edmondson, for instance, did. So what we do is the normal. What is not normal? The carrot and stick method. The carrot and stick method just doesn't work. There's enough scientific evidence for that. And also the idea to tell somebody, if you produce more pages, that you get a bonus, also doesn't work. That works if you do very simple and not very intellectual work. Then you could say, okay, if you go and if you want to pick up the grapes, and you pay somebody for the amount of grapes somebody is picking, perhaps there it makes sense, but not in our modern society. So we're the normal, so to say.
Yeah. So the concept, getting out of fear, getting commitment, and this commitment is sustained by reciprocity. That's what I think is important to notice, is that the solidarity goes both ways. I mean, I'm committed to the company's activities, and the company is also connected to my life. So the last question I will ask you is about leadership, precisely, because we often think of purpose as being led by the leader or the co-founder. That the personality of this person, his own connection to his own values, are the inspiration and the engines of purpose. So my question is it truly the case? I mean, is the role of the leader very important, so important that it has to find a way of trickling down to other people? Or is purpose, or can purpose be shared by everybody? So,
it should be about purpose. And I mean, if you Google in the internet, I do quite a lot on this topic, because we install primus inter pares, so first among equals. So if you go back to a history, if you take Polish Athens, 2,500 years old, so it's not. Sometimes people say that's very innovative what you're doing, and I always say no, it's not very innovative, because Polish Athens 2,500 years ago, it's always about checks and balances. So it's Montesquieu. It's about trias politica, and that's what, let's say, our way of doing business or building structures in business. It's before Enlightenment is aristocracy. And what I always say as a historian is that business has not seen enlightenment yet. So it's about trias politica. It doesn't exist in companies. And for a certain period of time, this may work. So if you're lucky, you have a very servant leader, or it's this all Platonian idea of the king who is a philosopher. And for those who are interested, Syracuse experiment of Plato. It's very old. No, it's the opposite. So you have to. It's about avoidance of power. It's about values, and it's about checks and balances. So, for instance, I will step back at the end of the year in the Paris concept, and during history, for instance, if you see Venice or also the merchant cities or Amsterdam, this whole republican tradition of citizens governing their cities, that's the old model, which is much more sustainable than strong leadership. And before the COVID crisis just started, I had to do a talk for researchers at the University of Amsterdam. I said, this will be an extremely interesting experiment, the whole COVID crisis, because you have an exceptional situation that all around the world, you have the same situation, and leadership will react differently. And there will be a big correlation with the situation you have, the way I hope or thought let's say countries are dealing with this. And you see, for instance, the more feminine team-based orientation, like New Zealand, but also even you see, for instance, Merkel in Germany, etc. It's totally different with the other way of Johnson in the UK or Trump as an example. And then suddenly people start to question the systems which are behind. So we didn't question the US in the past that much, although they had exactly the same problems. But now you see what the negative side is of strong leadership, that if you have the wrong person in place, that is extremely risky what can happen to your country or to your company.
Okay, well, thank you. Now I think that we're going to open the discussion to everybody. So now if anybody wants to ask a question to Tom, they can put their camera on and join us in the fishbowl.